Doug Lesmerises back with Bill Landis. Landis, we usually rank best Northern players here. We're doing Northern coaches instead, and we decided to do this before the Mel Tucker suspension, which is almost certainly going to be a firing, arose. We have to talk about this. Mel Tucker, former, Northeast Ohio native, played at Wisconsin, former Ohio State assistant, former Browns assistant. His two mentors in his coaching life are Nick Saban and Jim Tressel. Got a chance to be a head coach too late, I think, in life. Had 1 year at Colorado, then got lured away by Michigan State and got the huge contract after a really good year, too, at Michigan State, 11 wins. And here we are. He has been suspended after admitting to having what he called phone sex with Brenda Tracy, who is a rape survivor who goes around and talks to college football teams to talk to young football athletes about like, hey, like this is what happens. Don't do this. Don't be this. And she said it was unwanted sexual advances by Mel Tucker. There's no dispute. They both agree that it happened, and he's going to lose his job. And it is a stunning fall. But if the facts as presented right now, there's been an investigation at Michigan State for months. It certainly do not look very good for Mel Tucker. What do you think of this whole situation?
Yeah, I think I guess we'll have to see if we ever get to the heart of the issue in terms of, there's two sides to it, I guess, but even regardless of that, like he should lose his job because that's just not a thing you should do when you're the head coach at a Power 5 football program. So he's out, and it makes me wonder where Michigan State goes from here, because it's a program built on the backs of transfers, and that has been successful in 1 year of Mel Tucker and not as much so in other years of his tenure. And I think that would lead me to believe that like there's a little bit of a rebuild that has to happen there, because when you bring in a lot of like hired guns, for lack of a better term, I think the thought is a lot of them are going to leave now that the guy who brought them in is not going to be there. So Michigan State, I think now is on the precipice of probably taking a little bit of a step back here as a program.
Michigan's good, which is not good for Michigan State. Mark D'Antonio took advantage to the utmost when Michigan was down. And so I think I agree. It's just when you think about what Michigan State and Northwestern football have been not so long ago, and what happened at both those programs with Pat Fitzgerald and now Mel Tucker, it is like the decision-making, right, of these incredibly highly paid, incredibly powerful people who are in charge of the lives of 100+ young men. And then you see, and again, just the facts that are known, right, and not in dispute would lead you to believe that there is poor decision-making happening, at the very least, from the people in power. And it is a reminder, again, for all of us. It is easy to deify college football head coaches. They are the only constant in a world where players move in and out. They are paid more than university presidents, but they are not infallible. And they prove it to us again and again. So I don't want to paint all college football coaches with a broad brush and be like, man, who knows what all of them are doing behind the scenes. But let's also make sure we don't paint them with the broad brush. It's like, hey, man, shaping young men. Oh, $8 million a year. They're all worth it. Like, there's some guys making terrible choices with immense money and immense power. And we all need to be careful. And so in this world where it can be very easy, I think, to doubt players or complain about NIL or not want to pay them or whatever, always remember that the guys who are getting paid, there are some of them who are screwing it up.
Yeah.
Some we're going to find out about and some we're not. And so when you're making $1 million a year, millions and millions, he had a $90 million contract. You've got to be on point in every part of your life. And he used the power of the Michigan State football program. Brenda Tracy comes in, speaks to the team multiple times, and he used that power and influence to then do this in his personal life. And so it's like, oh, it happened. His guys using their position for things that are at the very least unwanted, but certainly seem even worse than that. So They're just people, man. They're just people. And so are the players. But I think we're much more apt to be like, hey, they're just guys. They're just 20 and 21 and 22-year-old young men. Whatever. They're not perfect. Neither are the 50-year-olds. Let's rank coaches. Again, almost unanimity for us. We ranked the top 15 coaches in Northern football based on like, hey, right now, build a program, win games this season. Who would you take? And we both take Jim Harbaugh. Is it just no doubt about it?
Did not think twice about it. Like there are two, or there actually I shouldn't say there are two. There are a couple, I think, like really good established top of their game program builders here. Jim Harbaugh is one of them, but also he's gotten his team like nearly to the mountaintop by making the college football playoff the last 2 years. So no, I did not hesitate.
It's a reminder, and I'm going to do research on this, but in the South, they think they care so much that they can't tolerate anybody not winning right away.
Mm-hmm.
They look at quick firings, I think, as a badge of honor. And there's a guy at the top of this list in Jim Harbaugh who maybe COVID helped him out, but maybe Michigan was kind of going to let it play out anyway. I mean, he wasn't awful. They had an awful year in the COVID year. But they were winning games, but not winning the most important games before that. But they did not have they didn't make a quick move, even when maybe I thought they should have, but plenty of people thought they should have. And look at the results. Look at the payoff. There's a guy who didn't quite make our list, but that we both voted for in our top 15, Dino Babers at Syracuse, who is like at a sort of a JV level compared to Michigan, the same thing. That guy had a great early, like year 3 or 4, won 10 games, then had like a 1-win year. But they did not pull the trigger on him. And now I think they had a really good start last. It's Syracuse football, but somehow you can't let the South take impatience as a badge of honor. And I don't think we in the North have to say, well, they wouldn't tolerate this at Tennessee. It's like, okay, do you want to be Tennessee?
Yeah.
By the way, Tennessee's not going to be good this year. I knew that too. Tennessee's not going to be good this year. So I'm not saying that, but that doesn't mean go fire Josh Heupel. Like maybe let him work it out a little bit. So a nod. We're working it out. Kings of the North, we're working it out. Have a little patience. Have a little grace, man. Jim Harbaugh, number 1. Number 2, Kyle Whittingham from Utah. For both of us, why?
I mean, we had the conversation last week about what is Utah the best coach team in the country, and it's a worthwhile conversation, one that I think we probably could have had the last few years. Just consistency, like not the top level, I guess, production that you would expect from a coach who's this high on a list like this, but also like I think you have to remember the ceiling for a program like Utah as well, and I think that program has been operating at or near its ceiling for almost the entirety of his tenure.
They just find crazy ways to win, man. Yep. And if he ever was at a place where you could just stack talent in a different way, who knows what he would do. 3 is Ryan Day. It feels right. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I hesitated at all here. Again, I don't know how right now you could rank Ryan Day ahead of Jim Harbaugh, even though Ryan Day has made the playoff 3 out of 4 years. And then Kyle Whittingham is just a different kind of evaluation. I don't think you certainly can have Ryan Day any lower than this, but it's not my intention, and it's not what we're going to go into for a long period of time on this podcast right now. But when I said let guys work it out, it's just a reminder for anybody who's like, Ryan Day doesn't do this, whatever. Right? I mean, you have a standard and you have expectations. It doesn't mean you can lose to your rival. But you can't look at Jim Harbaugh at the top of this list and not think to yourself, okay, well, is there a lesson to be learned there? So it's not a cop-out, and it's not letting Ryan Day off easy if Ohio State doesn't start to play better. But is there something that Ohio State fans or anybody evaluating Ryan Day should have in their back of their mind as they think about how Jim Harbaugh got the number 1 on a list like this?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm trying to remember, like, Jim Harbaugh, they're more or less kind of doing what they've always done on offense under Jim Harbaugh. I guess they're modernizing it a little bit with some of the quarterbacks are going after now. So that's a change. I don't know. I think Jim Harbaugh has been pretty on point with a lot of his assistant coaching hires, and maybe that's like a thing that you need to let not early, but
the second round.
Yeah, the second round. Like, and Ryan Day, I think, is going through some similar stuff as a guy with far less experience than Jim Harbaugh, trying to figure out the right way to build a staff and trying to hit on a couple things. And he probably does deserve, on one hand, a little bit of runway to try to figure that out. But I'll hear any argument to the contrary that says like Ohio State is not a place where you should get to figure that out. So it's tough. I agree with you. I don't think he should be any lower on this list than we have him. And depending on your criteria, he could probably be first or second. But I felt like third was right, just based off still some questions I have about him and his ability to get a program like Ohio State truly over the top.
Fourth is Deion Sanders. And this is one that is hard to wrap your arms around a little bit just because he's new. But he won at Jackson State. And the idea of what he has done, Colorado State is like another like prime time big network game this week. They cannot get enough of Deion Sanders. And that matters. When you're a place like Colorado, instantaneous credibility and interest is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then guess what? 2-0 and good hires and good motivation and players who know what they're supposed to do. Not a perfect team in year one, but I don't doubt Deion at 4 here at all. Don't doubt it at all. What's the case that he's too high? Like, what would be, like, why would, we're playing ADs. All right. We offered it to Harbaugh. He said no. Kyle Whittingham, Ryan Day said no. We're going to the next guy. We're going to Deion. Why is that wrong?
I don't know that that's inherently wrong. I saw your list and thought it was nuts that you had Deion ahead of Luke Fickell.
So, all right, let's have a conversation. Luke is 5. Deion's 4 for our combined list. Luke is, I think, going to be very good at Wisconsin. But I don't think Luke could do at Colorado what Deion has done in 2 weeks. Now, long-term, sustainable, I get it. But I'm not at all thinking that Deion Sanders, what he's doing is not sustainable. I don't think that at all. So out of the gate, explosion. And I do think I think Deion Sanders is now going to recruit like crazy because I think kids are going to want to be part of that. It is nothing against Luke Fickell, who made the playoff at Cincinnati, which is a stinking miracle and is a very good football coach. It is, if we're going to have a top tier of Harbaugh Whittingham day, I'm putting Deion at the top of tier 2 because of the explosion, and he's rare. Yeah. So it's nothing against Luke, but I would put Deion ahead of anybody who's hasn't made the playoff 3 out of 4 years, or who has not done this for 20 years like Kyle Whittingham, or who has not made the playoff the past 2 years like Jim Harbaugh. So it's all about Deion and nothing about Luke. But why did you have Luke ahead of Deion?
Just because I know that Luke knows how to build a program. And like I think Deion does, but I know that Luke does. You make a good point about the recruiting. If you're going to tell me that Deion is going to now recruit high school players and build his roster in what I think is a more sustainable way than just farming the transfer portal every year, then I would think differently on his long-term projections there. If you're just rebuilding it through the transfer portal every year, I do not think that is a way to find sustained success. I think you're going to have like pretty major highs and lows when you do stuff like that. But that remains to be seen. And I guess I would give him the benefit of the doubt that he might do it the more traditional way and then supplement with transfers. I love Deion. I like culture coach. I setting the program standard, accountability. I think for a guy who's done what he's done in his football playing career is a big deal. They were good at Jackson State. You know, they had a tremendous talent advantage over a lot of the teams they played, but they were good there. I'm just like, I'm too much in wait and see mode to put him that high. I mean, I think I had him 5th, so like I'm not like, you know, I'm not far off from you, but Luke has done it, and that meant a lot to me. So I put Luke 4th.
It is one of those, like, if you were just, and they're both first-year head coaches at Power 5 programs, and if you were in a room with the board of trustees and the school president and some donors and the AD, and you're like, okay, we want to be really good now and long-term, our final 2 candidates are Deion Sanders and Luke Fickell.
I think the answer to that greatly depends on where I'm at and what we've done and what we're trying to be.
I think if you are trying to do something that hasn't been done at your school, it's Deion Sanders.
Yeah.
I think if you're trying to raise your level like Wisconsin's been good, but they want to be more than good, then I think it might be Luke Fickell. Because if you haven't ever really been much of anything, you'll roll the dice. And it's only a dice roll because Deion Sanders has not been doing it as long. That's the only dice roll to me. There's no other part of it that's a dice roll. But if you're like, well, we can't be terrible. Like, Luke's not going to be terrible.
Yeah.
And I actually don't think Deion Sanders is going to be terrible. But it's just a smaller sample size. That's all.
Right.
I'd be hard-pressed to walk out of that room without hiring Deion, though. Okay. Yeah. And I'm not going to apologize. Even if it's wrong, I'm not going to apologize because you can't do the same old thing. And I think Luke is probably the right guy for Wisconsin, but Deion Sanders was the right guy at Colorado. He also would have been the right guy at Auburn. Number 6 tie, Kalen DeBoer from Washington and James Franklin from Penn State. I think this is a reasonable tie. I think Kalen DeBoer, again, smaller sample size. I think people get down on James Franklin, but actually he's been pretty darn good there. And Northern football, if these are the guys who were tied for 6th as your best coaches, pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good. You had Kalen DeBoer, I think, much higher than I had him 8th. You had him 6th. Is that right?
That sounds right.
Yeah. So you're a little high. It's a smaller sample size of Kalen DeBoer. Like, he was good at Fresno State. Good early start here at Washington State. He is a national championship coach at a lower level of football, which I think matters. Just winning pedigree, ability to showing a process that can get you to that kind of place. So yeah, they're both good. I think people have legitimate questions about like James Franklin, the game day coach, which I do not dispute, but program builder, recruiter, culture setter, very good.
Kalen DeBoer, like Washington, I like the Jimmy Lake hire, right? Chris Peterson leaves. They hired Jimmy Lake, the defensive coordinator. Jimmy Lake was the defensive coordinator when we were covering Ohio State and Washington, that Rose Bowl in 2018. I just thought that guy, that guy has it. Disaster.
Yep.
And then Kalen DeBoer flipped it immediately. So like that, like on a game plan offensively, and it feels like he got guys to buy in right away. So I am very high on Kalen DeBoer.
He's also only 48 years old, Kalen DeBoer.
Only 48 years old. I like anybody younger than me. Marcus Freeman, 8th. I have no dispute with Marcus Freeman, and this might be low, and I think he was the guy Notre Dame had to hire. I think it has a chance to be great. He's just new.
Yeah, he's new. I think there's a lot of projection baked into that, right? And I have some questions about whether or not this was maybe too big of a job for him to take as his first job. Might he have been better off suited like going to Cincinnati to replace Luke Fickell there? Maybe, but I still think he's going to end up being a good coach. Again, I think he's going to recruit fairly well there. Notre Dame's, I think, natural recruiting ceiling might keep him from ever truly contending for national championships, but I do think he's a smart guy who knows what he's doing, and he's a pretty good defensive mind too.
9 is Jonathan Smith from Oregon State, who basically has rebuilt that program from nothing. And I think, I don't want a guy to not be able to move on, but he's a former quarterback at Oregon State, and I think he might be their head coach for 40 years, and everything on that campus will be named for him. And go be Chris Peterson at Boise State.
Mm-hmm.
Go crush. But there's a little Matt Campbell here, right? People still think Matt Campbell's a good football coach at Iowa State. They had a peak, and then right when it was like, oh my gosh, they're going to get over the top, they fell back. And now they're good. They're still overachieving for Iowa State, but Matt Campbell's not in our top 10 right now. So like the sustainability of like, is Oregon State won 10 games last year. They're going to win 10 again. They can win 10 again. Now, the one thing is, they got DJ Uiagalelei as a transfer. They got Aiden Childs out of Southern California as a freshman quarterback who played the whole second half against UC Davis. That was a huge commitment and a huge recruit. So it's not only portal. They're actually building stuff there. I do think Jonathan Smith deserves to be in our top 10, but I think it's hard to gauge sometimes because he might be just as good of a coach, and 3 years from now, Oregon State might be 3-9 because it's hard to win 10 games at Oregon State every year.
Yeah, easier to win 10 games if you're in the Mountain West, I think. Which is something that could keep him pretty high on these lists, I think. I agree with you. Like, if he stays there forever, he's going to build some kind of legacy. I do wonder who might come to try to lure him away, and if it seems likely that Oregon State's going to be playing true Power 5 football, will that be something that wants him to get to leave that job earlier than he would have otherwise? But I think he's a tremendous coach, has really built something sustainable there. And even if it's not 10 wins a year, if you're hovering between 7 to 10 wins a year at a place like Oregon State, that is wildly impressive to me.
Just missing our top 10, Dan Lanning at Oregon, Pat Narduzzi at Pitt, Brett Bielema at Illinois, because number 10 is Matt Rule at Nebraska. This is tough, but his first year at Temple in 2013, they were 2-10. 2 years later, they were 10-4. And then at Baylor, his first year in 2017, they were 1-11. 2 years later, they were 11-3. So year 3 for Matt Rule, he comes in and takes over a thing that is broken. And by year 3, they're great. So let's check back on Nebraska in 2025. But it's hard to ignore that pedigree, right? Which is why we have him at 10 on this list.
Yeah, I like the NFL stuff did not factor into this whatsoever for me. He does have a small-ish sample size as a college coach. I was looking at stuff. He's actually been a college coach for not as long as I thought he was. But man, like winning double-digit games at Temple, it feels like borderline impossible. Like,
Yeah.
they don't have their own stadium. Their facilities stink. The school is in the middle of North Philly and is just not the most desirable place to be. It is hard to get good football players there. It is even harder to win games. And the fact that he did it for back-to-back years there, winning 10 games is among the more impressive coaching feats I've seen. And then he went and was building Baylor, I think, in a similar fashion until he left. So he has made some decisions here at Nebraska that have, I think maybe he got a little too aggressive with his roster retool there. And they're going to be pretty awful this year. But I would bet on him finding a way to make that program better in the long run.
I saw a Nebraska writer tweet this during that game that Matt Rule has done a lot right at Nebraska, but he picked the wrong quarterback in the portal. And there's good portal quarterbacks available. And Jeff Sims, transfer from Georgia Tech, just has trouble not turning it over. And that just took Nebraska out of that Colorado game. And the result of that might be a bad record this year when there's actually some structural things at Nebraska that are working out. And so go recruit a quarterback and build it from within, and we'll check back in 2025. So our top 10 of our 28 Northern teams, our top 10 head coaches: Jim Harbaugh 1, Kyle Whittingham of Utah 3. Kyle Whittingham of Utah 2. Ryan Day 3, Deion Sanders 4, Luke Fickell 5, Kalen DeBoer of Washington and James Franklin of Penn State tied at 6, Marcus Freeman 8, Jonathan Smith at Oregon State 9, and Matt Rule at Nebraska 10. When we come back, I am mad. We started off just doing this thing like, hey, let's do like a little Brian Ferentz thing. I'm ticked.